Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. I'm so excited to share the very first 2022 garden tour with you. It is getting towards the end of May. We've had a few really great storms over the last few weeks, so the garden has really come to life. Our goal every year is to grow a little more than the year before, so I'm excited to bring you along as we see how much this year's garden produces. As we try to get a little bit more self-sustaining as a homestead, we are learning about different crops and things that we can grow to supplement our animal feed, and one of those is sunflowers. You can give your spent sunflower heads to your chickens, and so next year I intend to plant a whole lot more. Like, we may go ahead and plow up like a 1/4 acre and plant the mammoth sunflowers that produce the huge heads with lots of seeds. We even have a neighbor, I say neighbor, but they're about 15 minutes away, who plants a huge field of sunflowers. And I don't know if it's just for pleasure or photography, but I've thought about contacting them and saying, do you do anything particular with your spent sunflowers? If not, could we buy them from you or barter some eggs? We expanded our garden this year from 1,000 square feet to 2,000 square feet, and the goal was to see just how much we could preserve. Now, I planted, I believe the final count was about 85 tomatoes. The majority of those are Amish paste and San Marzano, and I would say about 10 are cherry tomatoes and big slicers. So the tomatoes are getting completely out of control already. We have a greenhouse now, and that was a total game changer for us this year. So my tomatoes got a really quick and early start, and they are producing like crazy. Look at these. I dare say thousands of tomatoes. I'm gonna have to wade through these. I've also got weeds taking over big time. But the tomatoes look fantastic. On the other side of this cattle panel, I have cucumbers trellising. This is a 30-foot row of sweet potatoes. I'm trying to wrap the vines around the fence. My goal this year was to utilize the perimeter garden fence as much as possible. Look at that big old volunteer zinnia. Honestly, I have a battle with volunteer zinnias every year. Sometimes there are hundreds. But this is our row of sweet potatoes, and I will just wrap the vines through and around the fencing as they get longer and bigger. This is the first year that we have done lots of long rows. We don't typically have like a big row garden. We use the Back to Eden method, but this made more sense this year. Rather than having a ton of variety in our garden, we're just growing a handful of vegetables and a handful of varieties in efforts to produce as much as we can, to put up as much as we can. I had a goal last year of growing a year's worth of bulb onions. It was definitely a learning experience. I didn't feed them enough, and the bulbs just were very small. We used a lot of them for fresh eating, and the super small ones I dehydrated and turned into onion powder, which was really fun. I used the tops as well, and so it was a beautiful like white, purple, and green onion powder. Unfortunately, an entire dehydrator full of onion tops and small bulbs only produced about an inch, maybe a 1/4 cup of onion powder. So it really brought a whole new appreciation to the giant containers I get from Sam's and Costco. Now, over here, I did have some other tomatoes planted, but I lost quite a few when I initially put them in the ground. I have 2 different varieties of cucumbers this year. So you can see back here, these are my favorite, Japanese long. I harvested our first one yesterday, and it was 14 inches long. This one's pretty big also. It'll probably be ready in a few more days. We've had a lot of rain, so I'm trying to keep a close eye. See, this one's got some rot on the end. Unfortunately, as they start to really get big, you have to really search through. I think that's a muncher. Have to search through the leaves. There's another cute one. So I've got the Japanese long, and I also have the munching variety that will be smaller. Like this one will be ready to pick in just a few days. This is so funny. This is a volunteer sunflower. Now this is the part of the garden that's new this year. This is about 1,000 square feet. And this is where our chickens were last year. And that was the plan, so they would peck around, hopefully get any pests that like to overwinter and peck at the weeds. Well, I also threw them all of my garden rejects, whether it was a spent sunflower or rotten tomatoes. And so we have all kinds of fun volunteers coming up on the chicken side of the garden this year. Well, this is a sunflower that is coming up right next to the cattle panel, which is so funny. It's like she knew she might need some support. These are 2 table grape vines that I purchased, I believe, from Tractor Supply last year. And I'm just not quite sure where I'm going to give them a permanent home yet. So I put their pots over here and we'll let them do their thing this year, and then probably when they die back in the fall, we'll decide on a permanent spot. We were thinking about putting raspberries and grapes around the perimeter of our orchard. So that's a possibility. Now over here on our other side of the perimeter fence are more San Marzano and Amish paste tomatoes. There are just so many. They produce like they are a cherry variety. Look at all of those. It's not unusual for there to be 8 or 9 in one little cluster. It's amazing. The San Marzanos are absolutely amazing. I think I heard about that variety from Living Traditions Homestead, and I will definitely be growing those every year. All right, like I said, we've got about 85 tomato plants altogether. It is becoming quite the jungle here in our tomatoes. I need to come through and pinch off suckers, and I need to support some of these that have branches falling to the ground. It's really okay to let them grow wild, but they will be more susceptible to pests and fungus and things like that if they are closely planted and you start letting them grow wild, because they need to have plenty of airflow between the plants and between the branches. I don't know if you have ever heard about shaking your tomato blossoms. I learned it from M.I. Gardner. But when your blossoms open, if you'll just go in and shake them a little bit, it helps them to self-pollinate. I guess it's not called self-pollinating if you're the one doing it. But basically, if you shake your tomato blossoms while they're open and facing down, then every one of your flowers will end up producing a tomato. And so far, I have found that to be true. I'm really excited to try some new tomato recipes this year. I primarily can roasted pureed tomatoes because we can use it for such a variety of things in our cooking. But I plan on doing quite a bit of salsa this year, at least 12 quarts, so that we have 1 quart per month until next year. I'd also like to try out barbecue sauce and ketchup. This is my big 60-foot double row of potatoes. So we've got a mix of Kennebec which is a white potato that's not super starchy, which makes for good canning, and also some red potatoes. And I don't remember, they might have been Pontiac red. Look at these leaf leg pests. I get them badly. See that? So this row of potatoes is looking really good. I need to put some more hay down around the base of the plants. I trenched them about 8 inches below the soil, and then we topped it with mulch, and they're looking really good. I'm also really hoping, as some of my early spring summer crops die off, I intend to succession plant and put more regular potatoes in. I know I won't have time for a second round of sweet potatoes necessarily, but I can probably do close to a second full round of regular potatoes, even if I end up having to harvest them a little smaller before our first frost. This is our bean and pea tunnel this year. We made a big arch trellis with 16-foot cattle panels, and I have pole beans growing on one side and sweet peas on the other. Now, I don't expect the peas to last too long for me. They do not like the extreme heat, and we are quickly approaching weeks long in the 90s. I've never grown pole beans before, and they are so beautiful. Look how they naturally just twist and wind their way up. I decided last year, after I planted bush beans and hardly harvested anything, that I am not a bush bean kind of girl. It's just too much work, and honestly, it's just too annoying to get down on your hands and knees and harvest all of these bush beans when the pests are getting bad and it's hot and humid. So I decided I was going to try pole beans, and a lot of them, in efforts to get a good bean harvest this year. So I will let you know how these go. But apparently, if they have something to continue reaching for and climbing, they should end up climbing up and over the trellis and maybe all the way back down. Now, when my sweet peas have had enough of the heat and they start to die back, I will pull them and I will plant more pole beans. We've got quite a lot of big sweet peas ready for harvest. I think the kids and I will get out here this afternoon. I tried to strategically place my herbs and flowers this year. So this is just some marigold that I started from seed, as well as some basil. That one on the left is looking a little bit pale, but the one on the right is looking good and might need to be topped. All right, the entire perimeter of this side of the fence are different squashes and zucchinis, all the way down. Now, all of that big thick stuff in the center is winter squash. I believe these are yellow squash, these 4 right here. These got a much later start. I am already battling squash bugs. I haven't actually seen any squash bugs yet, but I have picked off a whole lot of eggs. My winter squash is doing incredibly well. There's some acorn squash. A whole bunch of acorn squash. I don't know if you're familiar with squash fertilization, but it's pretty important to fertilize your squash blossoms if you want all of your blossoms to produce a good, healthy vegetable. So you can see all of these potential acorn squashes. Now, this one likely will not make it. It had some blossom end rot, which just fell off. Same with this one. You can see it's getting kind of wrinkly. So if I can find, like this for example, I usually, look at that. Oops, you can't see it. There's 2 squash bugs. Ugh. All right, so if you get the squash flower that looks like the male part, it's in the center, and I just peel back the petals. I know not everyone recommends this method, but it always works for me. Definitely does not help that it has ants all over it. All right, you take this, and this is the female flower. And you just touch the pollen to the female flower. And now that flower is fertilized. I'll go ahead and do this one down here. You can see some of my other discarded male flowers. I never have a lack of male flowers, which is why I go ahead and just remove them. Over here we've got butternut squash. The little butternut squash babies are so cute. Look at that one growing on the other side of the fence. So my family does like winter squash, butternut squash, acorn, spaghetti squash. Look at this monster spaghetti squash. It almost looks like a watermelon. Isn't that incredible? While my family does enjoy winter squash, we would never go through the amount that I'm hoping to grow this year. Winter squash saves wonderfully even in the south if we cure it and leave plenty of stem on and store it in our pantry. So I'm hoping to use that as one more supplemental feed for our chickens over the winter. It's just incredible. There's another one. And down here, I believe these 2 are zucchini. Yep. Here's my first little zucchini started. I'm gonna have to fight like heck to keep these away from the squash bugs. This leaf has some damage on it. There seems to be a lot of fire ants in here today. I don't see any squash bug leaves. That's good. I mean squash bug eggs, I'm sorry. I think that must be one more zucchini. I planted 2 loofah and they both died. I planted these nasturtium that were doing well in the greenhouse and they both died. Now, following along this perimeter fence as we get to the corner here, we've got watermelon and cantaloupe down the way. I don't think I actually have any baby cantaloupe going yet. Lots of flowers and lots of growth. Now, this row, looking back toward the bean tunnel, is about a 30-foot row of ground cherries. This is a fantastic plant. I kind of feel like it's a hybrid fruit and vegetable. They're not super duper sweet, but they will make great pie filling and jams, and you can sweeten them as you like when you preserve them. But one of these plants is capable of producing over 300 ground cherries. They look like tomatillos in their wrapping. To me, it looks like a Chinese lantern. I love it. And then next to the ground cherries, I've got a 30-foot row of peppers. Now, I got a late start with my peppers. These are looking very pale and not super healthy. I got them from a friend, and I'm pretty sure that because she had started far more than she needed. And I lost quite a few because my dog likes to dig up things that I put blood meal in. Oh my goodness, look at this. It is definitely time to hill up my red potatoes. They're coming out of the ground. That's not good. That's so amazing, but not good. Okay, definitely time to mulch and hay the potatoes again. I have quite a variety of peppers this year. I think I have more hot and like sweet spicy peppers than I do bell. I'm also growing a couple different varieties of hot peppers that I've never grown before. So I'm looking forward to experimenting with different Mexican sauces and canning some hot sauce, as well as dehydrating cayenne peppers to make our own cayenne pepper powder. My husband uses that on almost everything. Here are some more volunteers. This is another ground cherry that's right here next to the potatoes. And here is a volunteer tomato. There's a volunteer tomato. There's another one out there in the potatoes. So funny. I just don't have the heart to pull up volunteers. I'm like, if that seed was resilient enough to make it through winter and chickens and all of that, then I'm just going to let it go. This is our cantaloupe, and I don't see any fruit started just yet. Only flowers. Hopefully we'll have a good cantaloupe year. I have a lot of space on this end of the garden that I just didn't plant. I think I got a bit overwhelmed. Plus we have a lot of weeds from trees that we pulled up. So we didn't plant anything in this section. I'm thinking about doing just a small experimental wheat patch because we want to start growing our own wheat. I said in a previous video, 37 pounds of wheat berries planted on a 1/4 acre of land will produce between 600 and 650 pounds of wheat. That is just absolutely incredible to me. And we've grown wheat before by accident by dumping some old wheat into our burn pile, and we're just absolutely shocked at how easy it grew without any attention or effort. So we're really looking forward to trying that. All right, the last thing I haven't shown you is my little okra row. I didn't have fantastic luck with my okra this year. So I've only got about 10 plants, but I intend to be very intentional as they become ripe so I can preserve them. We'll probably do some pickled okra as well as just blanching and freezing some of it. I intend to utilize my children a lot more this year in the garden than I have in the past. The garden has always been Mommy's happy place. I will bring the picnic blanket out here and pull weeds for hours and listen to an audiobook or a podcast. But this year I've definitely bitten off more than I can chew by myself. See, this is another whole row that is not planted, this cattle panel. I had some tomatoes right here where these grape vines are now, but I lost them. I don't know what happened. I lost 2 entire rows of tomatoes and still have about 85. So I think the kids and I are just going to have to kind of take 1 or 2 rows at a time, several times a week, to weed and prune, check for pests, support our tomatoes. I'm really excited to see how much this year's garden produces. If you're gardening this year, I'd love to hear what you're planting and how things are going. I know not all zones are planted out yet or past their last frost, but I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching.